been going on. And not only that, but the people of the world should know, because we're all citizens of the world, and what the United States Air Force and others do could be of critical importance to us as well. So I said, I've got to speak out. And before I did, however, I decided to phone the general. He was someone I had met at an aviation display, and so Phil, my nephew, gave him a heads up that I'd be phoning him, and I phoned him, and even before I could more or less say hello, he said, every word of it is true and more. And then he spent about 20 minutes telling me about the more, which included, he said, face-to-face meetings between the United States citizens and military and the extraterrestrials.
That's remarkable.
So with that assurance, and I said, now is the time to go public. And you know the rest of the story. I decided to do it at the last minute. And this was prompted by Victor Vigianis and Mike Bird, that you know. And yes. So they got me into it, and that was just the beginning.
Was there any ridicule for you at the time that you went public?
I think not as much as I probably expected, because the way that governments, and especially the United States government, has dealt with this issue, as you well know, is to try and talk people out of it, to keep them quiet. And then if that fails, to try and paint a picture of them as someone who's getting old, or who has maybe been watching the moon too much, or something like that. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. But on the positive side, in the 5 years that have intervened, this last year or two, there have been more what I call straight stories in the mainline press. The first 2 or 3 years, there were practically none. And they were quite interested in what I was going to say, but then when I said it, they didn't report it. And more recently, though there have been, in our papers at least, and I know there have been on some shows in the United States, Larry King Live and others, there have been some serious discussions of this issue, which you would never have heard 5 or 10 years ago.
You're being beamed all over North America tonight, of course. We've got a huge audience in Canada. We're on a number of stations there, and, of course, in the United States. Was this an American story, Paul, or did the Canadians know about this too? Did they participate in this technology exchange, or was it primarily just the United States?
It was primarily a U.S. Story, although when I got more familiar with the subject, I bumped into information about someone who had actually worked in a department that I took over after I left Defense, the Department of Transport. It was a chap by the name of Wilbert Smith, who seemed to be quite well known in UFO circles. And he was involved with the technology way back around, the end of the 40s and the early 50s, and had access to people in the United States in the know. And Wilbert wrote a top secret memorandum to the head of the communications department, section of the Department of Transport, and said that he had read a couple of books written by Americans, and he was convinced that it was true because it coincided with some experimentation that he'd been doing. And he got the Canadian Embassy in Washington to make some inquiries, and the information came back that yes, indeed, this was something that was real. And he said that it was more highly classified than the hydrogen bomb, and that a team headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush were starting to work on it and see how much of the technology they could reverse engineer. And he wanted the Canadian government to do some things, and they did a small project called Project Magnet. Unfortunately, it petered out after a few years, but certainly Wilbert Smith was convinced that the extraterrestrials were miles, light years ahead of us in technology, and B, that they were benign, and that C, that they had information that would make our lives look like, fairy princesses if we just listened to them and act more as they do. In other words, stop beating each other up and fighting, and start cooperating for the good of all.
It didn't sound like we listened to them, or if we did, we didn't do anything with it. Huh?
I'm afraid we're not listening as closely as we should. Yes, and so and it's since then I've read many books, and some of them well written and well documented, and seen hundreds and hundreds of documents, some that were highly classified, and talked to all kinds of people. As you know, I've been briefed by a whole range of people with a lot of personal experience. Stephen Greer and Paula Harris was
sure,
someone who introduced me to a lot of information and interesting people. The list goes on and on.
Paul, we're going to take this quick break, and then we're going to come right back and continue talking about light at the end of the tunnel, the survival plan for the human species. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment with Paul Hellyer on Coast to Coast AM. Well, I now have my company BlackBerry, and I have my personal Droid X, and now I'm waiting for our apps for Streamlink, Coast Insiders, so I can do what a lot of you do with your iPhones. By the way, Streamlink is available for just pennies a day. All you have to do is go to coasttocoastam.com and sign up for that. When I come right back, it's more with Paul Hellyer, author of Light at the End of the Tunnel, and also the former Minister of National Defense for the country of Canada. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. Paul, are you more convinced now than even before of this ET presence in this shared technology?
Well, there's absolutely no doubt. Frankly, there was never any doubt in my mind, because I'm very cautious in these areas. I don't say anything unless I'm certain that it's correct. If I'm not certain, I would hedge. But when I went public, I was absolutely convinced that they're real. I said so. I still know that is true. But of course, now I know a lot more about it, and a lot more about the things that are being looked at in various parts of the world. I don't think the United States is the only place where back engineering is being done, but I think it is the one area in the world where the most progress has been made. And one of the things, I guess, one of the things that interests me most is that global warming can only be fixed if we've got some really first-class fuels to replace fossil fuels. And I'm convinced that, some of the people that worked in the black operations, including Dr. Michael Wolff, said 10 years ago that the U.S. military, in conjunction with, working alongside with the extraterrestrials, had developed exotic fuels, both zero-point energy and cold fusion. Well, I think that is probably true, but certainly we don't know. And I doubt if the President of the United States knows, because the way these things operate, they only tell the politicians what they want them to know. And as long as they keep putting up the money, that's all they really want. And one of the most important reasons, there's so many important reasons why disclosure is essential, but one of the most important reasons is to find out about these exotic fuels and start installing them right away. It's too late for any more offshore drilling. It's too late for new works in the Alberta tar sands. We have to act now, not 10 or 20 or 30, 40 years from now. And if the technology exists, we should be told about it and start working on it now, immediately. And I know from what I've heard of the extraterrestrials from good authority that even if the technology is not in commercial
applications,
application ready, that they would give it to us if we asked them. Because, as you know from other people you've had on the show, that one of the things they're most concerned about is how our stewardship of the planet. And they want us to keep the planet intact as a ecosystem that's not only good for us, but good for them to visit us as well. And so I know that we could do it, but the Congress, I think, is going to have to act. The Congress has really been derelict in handing over so much money to projects that it doesn't know anything about, just taking somebody's word for the fact that it's a national security thing and that they're not entitled, just because they're the representatives of the people, that they're not entitled to know about it. And I think they're going to have to say, hey, no, that's not the way the system is supposed to work. This is supposed to be a democracy, and we're supposed to vote money for things that we think are in the public interest. And how can we tell whether it's in the public interest or not if we don't know what's going on? So I think that Congress is going to have to grasp the nettle and find out and set up some system that will really get the truth, starting, with things that everybody knows. When I say everybody, I mean those people who understand what's going on. Everybody knows, but then working their way up from there to the things that are so highly classified, and finding out just exactly what is there and the applications that they have for future benefit of mankind. And that I think is it's just absolutely top priority as far as I'm concerned. Well, then the third thing, maybe we can discuss this later, of course, is how to finance it, and that's where we have to change the banking system to make it possible to finance the whole changeover in 10 years.
Paul, if you were still in government in Canada, knowing what you know right now, and you had the perfect right to talk about disclosure. I mean, the Prime Minister said, Paul, do what you want to do what you think you have to do. How would you announce that to us? What would you say?
Well, I guess I would first probably take the diplomatic way and talk to my counterparts in the U.S. government and say, how much do you know? How much have you been told? And are they keeping secrets from you? And if so, if you're supposed to be in charge, why don't you exercise your authority? And then discuss with them privately and hope that they would then make a joint release or come clean and start something, which is really all that you want. But one of the things that is in my book, and this isn't from me. This is, Jim Sparks, who you must have had on the show, I'm
yes.
sure more than once probably, has suggested that there has to be